My name is Alex, and I'm the proud owner of a Jeep Wrangler, affectionately nicknamed the Beast. The Beast isn't just a car, it's a symbol of freedom, adventure, and my escape from the soul-crushing monotony of suburban life. Unfortunately, that escape is often hindered by where I live, Harmony Glade, a perfectly manicured, utterly predictable, and intensely regulated homeowners association nightmare. Harmony Glade is the kind of place where the lawns are always green, the houses are all painted in approved shades of beige, and the only thing that grows faster than the azaleas are the complaints filed with the HOA. Every mailbox is identical. Every trash can is hidden from view. It's step forward, but with slightly less enthusiasm. I bought the place for its location, close to work and with decent schools, but I quickly learned that the price of convenience was constant surveillance and petty rules. Before the Karen incident, there was the Great Garden Gnome debacle of 2022, apparently, gnomes are inappropriate lawn ornaments. Then came the flagpole fiasco, my American flag was deemed too large by the HOA bylaws. I thought I'd seen it all, but Harmony Glade always manages to surprise me. It seemed like peace was never in the cards. Little did I know that the queen of all complaints, the ruler of ridiculous requests, the master of malicious meddling, was about to enter the scene in a way that would involve flashing lights, shouting, and a very confused police officer. Her name, of course, was Karen. And this particular Karen took her HOA duties with deadly seriousness. She lived 3 doors down, a bastion of beige in a sea of, well, more beige. Her hair was always perfectly coiffed, her outfits always impeccably coordinated, and her disapproval was always palpable. Harmony Glade wasn't just a collection of houses, it was a carefully curated performance of suburban perfection. Every lawn was meticulously manicured, an emerald carpet stretching from one identical house to the next. The hedges were trimmed with laser-like precision, forming perfect green rectangles that screamed, "We follow the rules." Even the flowers were strategically planted according to an approved color palette, no rogue bursts of purple or orange allowed. The HOA, of course, was the director of this suburban stage play. They sent out weekly newsletters filled with passive-aggressive reminders about lawn height, trash can placement, and the proper way to display holiday decorations. Fines were issued with alarming frequency, and board meetings were legendary for their petty squabbles and thinly veiled insults. It was a pressure cooker of repressed emotions and meticulously maintained appearances. Living there felt like being trapped in a never-ending episode of a home improvement show, where the only goal was to achieve an unattainable level of blandness. My Jeep, the Beast, stuck out like a sore thumb. It was lifted, slightly muddy, despite my best efforts, and definitely not beige. It was a constant reminder that I didn't quite fit in, and I honestly didn't want to. The houses themselves were all variations on the same theme, 2-story colonials with attached garages and perfectly symmetrical windows. They were nice enough, I suppose, but they lacked any character or individuality. It was as if the builder had used a giant cookie cutter to stamp them out, creating a monotonous landscape of suburban conformity. Even the residents seemed to conform to a certain stereotype, stay-at-home moms with perfectly coiffed hair, dads who spent their weekends meticulously detailing their cars, and children who were always polite and well-behaved, at least in public. It was a world where everyone smiled politely and secretly judged each other's landscaping choices. And at the center of it all was Karen, the HOA's self-appointed enforcer, ready to pounce on any deviation from the norm. Karen wasn't just a resident of Harmony Glade, she was its self-appointed guardian, its beige-clad protector against the forces of individuality and nonconformity. She saw herself as a pillar of the community, a champion of the rules, and a tireless defender of the HOA's vision of suburban paradise. In reality, she was a busybody with a penchant for power trips and a complete lack of self-awareness. She knew every HOA rule by heart, from the precise shade of beige allowed for exterior paint to the acceptable length of grass blades. She patrolled the neighborhood like a hawk, scrutinizing every lawn, every mailbox, and every trash can for potential violations. And woe betide anyone who dared to cross her path. Her complaints were legendary. She'd once filed a formal grievance against a neighbor for having a slightly mismatched set of patio furniture. Another time, she'd called the HOA to report a rogue dandelion growing in someone's lawn. She even tried to get a family fined for letting their children play basketball in their driveway after 7 p.m. The other residents of Harmony Glade mostly avoided her, knowing that any interaction with Karen was likely to end in a lecture, a complaint, or both. They whispered about her behind her back, calling her the HOA queen or simply that woman. But no one dared to confront her directly, fearing her wrath and her seemingly endless supply of HOA ammunition. I, however, had a slightly different relationship with Karen. While I tried to avoid her as much as possible, my Jeep, the Beast, was a constant source of irritation for her. She saw it as an affront to Harmony Glade's carefully curated image, a symbol of rebellion in a sea of conformity. She'd made several passive-aggressive comments about it over the past few months, hinting that it was too large or too conspicuous for the neighborhood. I knew it was only a matter of time before she found a legitimate reason to complain about it. I just didn't expect it to happen at 4 a.m. The night before the 4 a.m. debacle started like any other Friday. I'd met up with some friends after work for a few drinks and some surprisingly good karaoke. The Beast and I cruised home around 1 a.m., the windows down, the radio blasting a classic rock anthem. It was a perfect night, a brief escape from the beigeness of Harmony Glade. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Karen's house was unusually bright. There were cars parked all along the street, and I could hear music and laughter coming from her backyard. It sounded like she was throwing a party, which was ironic, considering her usual disdain for noise and gatherings. I shrugged it off, figuring it was a one-time thing. After all, even HOA queens are allowed to have fun sometimes, right? I parked the Beast squarely in my driveway, making sure not to block the sidewalk or encroach on my neighbor's property. It was my driveway, after all, and I was entitled to park there. I grabbed my backpack from the passenger seat, double-checked that I hadn't left anything valuable in the car, and headed inside. I quickly got ready for bed, my mind still buzzing from the night's adventures. As I drifted off to sleep, I faintly heard the music from Karen's party, but it didn't bother me. I was too tired to care. Little did I know that a few hours later, I'd be rudely awakened by a furious Karen, demanding that I move my Jeep so her precious party guests could park in my driveway. It was a request so absurd, so entitled, so utterly Karen, that it would have been comical if it weren't happening at 4 a.m. And if it didn't involve the police. Bam! 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 The sound reverberated through my skull, instantly shattering my peaceful slumber. I bolted upright in bed, disoriented and confused. For a brief moment, I thought someone was trying to break down my door. My heart pounded in my chest as I fumbled for my glasses on the nightstand. Bam! 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 The insistent pounding continued, accompanied by a shrill voice that I instantly recognized. Alex! Open the door. I know you're in there. It was Karen. What in the world could she possibly want at this hour? I glanced at the clock on my phone, 4:03 a.m. Seriously? Groaning, I dragged myself out of bed and stumbled towards the door. I was still half asleep, my vision blurry, and my patience wearing thin. I pulled on a pair of sweatpants and stumbled down the stairs, muttering under my breath about inconsiderate neighbors and the importance of sleep. As I reached the front door, I could hear Karen's voice growing more agitated. Alex! I'm not kidding. Open this door right now. I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself. I knew that confronting Karen in my current state was a recipe for disaster, but I couldn't just ignore her. Whatever she wanted, it couldn't be good. I cautiously unlocked the door and pulled it open, revealing Karen standing on my porch, her face contorted with anger. She was dressed in a silk robe and slippers, her perfectly coiffed hair slightly disheveled. Behind her, I could see several cars parked haphazardly along the street, their headlights casting eerie shadows on the surrounding houses. What do you want, Karen? I asked, my voice raspy with sleep. Do you have any idea what time it is? Her eyes narrowed, and she glared at me with undisguised fury. Move your Jeep, she demanded, her voice dripping with venom. Move it now. Excuse me. I stammered, still trying to process what was happening. Did you just wake me up at 4 a.m. to tell me to move my Jeep? Yes, I did, Karen snapped, her voice rising in pitch. My guests are arriving any minute, and they need somewhere to park. And why, pray tell, I asked, sarcasm dripping from my voice, do your guests need to park in my driveway? Karen rolled her eyes, as if I were being deliberately obtuse. Because there's no other parking available. The street is full, and I need my guests to be comfortable. It's really not that difficult to understand. I stared at her in disbelief. So, let me get this straight. You're throwing a party, you didn't plan for parking, and now you expect me to move my car in the middle of the night so your guests can have a convenient spot? Is that about right? Exactly. Karen exclaimed, as if I'd finally grasped some profound truth. It's a simple request, Alex. Just move your Jeep down the street, and everyone will be happy. Happy? I repeated, my voice rising in anger. You wake me up at 4 a.m., demand that I move my car, and expect me to be happy about it? Are you out of your mind? Don't be ridiculous, Karen scoffed. It's just a minor inconvenience. Besides, she added, leaning closer and lowering her voice conspiratorially, it's for a very important event. You wouldn't want to ruin it, would you? Ruin what, Karen? Your desperate attempt to impress your friends with your perfectly curated suburban lifestyle. I retorted, my patience finally snapping. I'm not moving my car. It's my driveway, and I'm perfectly entitled to park there. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going back to bed. I turned to go back inside, but Karen blocked my path, her eyes blazing with fury. You can't do this, she shrieked, her voice cracking. You're ruining everything. Ruin what, Karen? Your perfectly orchestrated suburban fantasy. I retorted, standing my ground. I'm not moving my car. It's my property, and I have every right to park there. But my guests, she wailed, throwing her hands up in the air. Where are they going to park? That's not my problem, Karen, I said, my voice firm. You should have thought about parking before you decided to throw a party that starts at the crack of dawn. It's not a party, it's a brunch, she corrected, as if that somehow made it more acceptable. And they're arriving early because they're coming from out of town. Well, maybe they should have left earlier, I suggested, trying to suppress a yawn. Or maybe they should have booked a hotel with parking. I don't know, Karen, I'm not a travel agent. You're being completely unreasonable, she screamed, her face turning red. This is a matter of common courtesy. You should be willing to help your neighbors. Common courtesy? I scoffed. Is it common courtesy to wake someone up at 4 a.m. and demand that they move their car? I think not, Karen. Fine, she spat, her eyes narrowed. If that's how you want to play it, then fine. But don't say I didn't warn you. I know the HOA rules better than anyone, and I guarantee you're violating something. I'll make sure you regret this. With that, she turned on her heel and stomped back towards her house, muttering threats under her breath. I watched her go, shaking my head in disbelief. I couldn't believe she was actually threatening me over something so ridiculous. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it for a moment, trying to catch my breath. I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to let things go easily. I just had no idea how far she was willing to take it. I managed to climb back into bed, but sleep eluded me. Karen's threats echoed in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to unleash her full HOA fury upon me. I tossed and turned, trying to ignore the faint sounds of her party, which seemed to be growing louder as the sun began to rise. After what felt like an eternity, I finally drifted off to sleep, only to be jolted awake again a short time later. This time, it wasn't Karen banging on my door, but something far more alarming, the wail of police sirens. My eyes flew open, and I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. What was going on? Had someone been hurt? Was there a robbery? I scrambled out of bed and peered out the window. To my astonishment, I saw 2 police cars parked in front of my house, their flashing lights illuminating the street. Several neighbors were standing on their lawns, watching with a mixture of curiosity and concern. And standing next to one of the police cars, gesturing wildly, was Karen. My jaw dropped. Had she actually called the police on me? Over a parking space? It seemed too ridiculous to be true, but then again, this was Karen we were talking about. I quickly threw on some clothes and ran downstairs, my mind racing. What was I going to say to the police? How could I explain this insane situation without sounding completely crazy? As I reached the front door, I could hear Karen's voice, shrill and accusatory, rising above the wail of the sirens. And he refused to move his vehicle. It's obstructing traffic and disturbing the peace. He's being completely unreasonable. I took a deep breath, braced myself for the inevitable confrontation, and opened the door. The 2 police officers turned to face me, their expressions a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "Good morning, sir," one of them said, his voice weary. "We've received a complaint about a vehicle obstructing traffic. Is this your vehicle?" He pointed towards the beast, which was still parked innocently in my driveway. "Yes, officer, that's my Jeep," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "But as you can see, it's parked entirely on my property, in my driveway. It's not obstructing traffic in any way." The officer raised an eyebrow and glanced at Karen, who was now practically jumping up and down with indignation. "Ma'am, are you sure this vehicle is obstructing traffic?" "Of course, I'm sure," Karen shrieked, her voice reaching a fever pitch. "It's creating a hazard. My guests can't park anywhere. He's doing this on purpose, just to be difficult." "Ma'am, with all due respect," the officer said, his voice laced with exasperation, "there appears to be ample parking available on the street. It may not be directly in front of your house, but it's certainly not obstructing traffic." Karen sputtered, her face turning an alarming shade of purple. But, my guests are important. They shouldn't have to walk." "Ma'am," the officer repeated, his voice growing firmer, "I don't see any violation here. The vehicle is legally parked on private property. Unless you have any other concerns, we're going to have to close this case." Karen was clearly not ready to give up. "But what about the HOA rules?" she demanded, her voice dripping with venom. "He's probably violating some HOA regulation. I bet his grass is too long, or his trash cans are visible. You should check." The officer sighed, clearly regretting his decision to respond to this call. "Ma'am, we don't enforce HOA regulations. That's a civil matter. You'll have to take that up with the HOA board." But, Karen stammered, her carefully constructed facade of suburban perfection crumbling before my eyes. He's a menace to the neighborhood." "Ma'am," the officer said, his voice patient but firm, "I think it's time for you to go back inside and let everyone get some rest. There's no violation here, and we're not going to pursue this any further." He turned to me and gave me a weary smile. "Sorry for the disturbance, sir. Have a good day." With that, he and his partner turned and walked back to their patrol cars, leaving Karen standing on the lawn, sputtering with rage. As they drove away, I could hear her muttering under her breath about getting even and reporting me to the HOA. I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As the police cars faded into the distance, I watched Karen storm back to her house, her silk robe billowing behind her like a cape of suburban fury. The neighbors, who had been enjoying the early morning drama, slowly retreated back to their homes, their curiosity satisfied for now. I stood there for a moment, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. Had this really just happened? Had Karen actually called the police on me because I wouldn't move my car? It seemed too absurd to be true, but the flashing lights and Karen's sputtering rage were all too real. I knew I couldn't just let this go. Karen was clearly determined to make my life miserable, and I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. I decided to document everything that had happened, just in case she tried to escalate the situation further. I went inside and grabbed my phone, taking photos of the beast parked in my driveway, making sure to capture the property lines and the lack of any traffic obstruction. I also made a detailed written record of the events, including the time, the date, and everything that Karen had said. I even went next door and spoke to my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who had witnessed the entire incident from her front porch. She was more than happy to provide a written statement, confirming that the beast was legally parked and that Karen had been acting completely unreasonable. With the evidence gathered, I felt a little more prepared for whatever Karen might throw my way. I knew she wouldn't give up easily, but I was determined to stand my ground and defend my right to park my car in my own driveway. I finally managed to crawl back into bed, but sleep was still a distant dream. My mind was racing with thoughts of Karen, the HOA, and the escalating absurdity of the situation. I knew that this was just the beginning of a long and difficult battle, but I was ready to fight. After all, I had the beast on my side, and together, we could take on anything, even a 4 a.m. parking dispute with an HOA Karen. Or so I hoped. The next few days were relatively quiet. I braced myself for an onslaught of HOA violations or passive-aggressive notes on my door, but nothing happened. Karen seemed to have retreated into her perfectly manicured world, licking her wounds and plotting her next move. I used the time to catch up on sleep, work, and life in general. I even managed to take the beast out for a much-needed wash, scrubbing off the remnants of my last off-road adventure and trying to make it at least somewhat presentable for the discerning eyes of Harmony Glade. But the calm didn't last. On Tuesday morning, as I was getting ready for work, I received an official-looking envelope in the mail. It was from the Harmony Glade Homeowners Association. My heart sank. I knew what this was. Karen had finally made her move. I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter, my eyes scanning the formal language and bureaucratic jargon. It was an official violation notice, citing me for unapproved vehicle placement and failure to comply with HOA parking regulations. The letter claimed that the beast was too large for my driveway and that it was obstructing the view of neighboring properties. It also accused me of creating a nuisance and disrupting the peaceful enjoyment of the community. The violation notice demanded that I remove the beast from my driveway immediately and threatened me with fines and legal action if I failed to comply. It was signed by the HOA president, but I knew that Karen was the real mastermind behind it. I crumpled the letter in my hand, my anger simmering just below the surface. This was ridiculous. Karen was using the HOA to wage a personal vendetta against me, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I decided to fight back. I wasn't going to let Karen bully me into submission. I was going to challenge the violation notice, defend my right to park my car in my own driveway, and expose Karen for the petty, vindictive busybody that she was. The battle was on. And this time, I was ready. The first step in my counterattack was to gather even more evidence to support my case. I knew that the HOA board would likely side with Karen, given her history of complaining and her influence within the community. But I wasn't going down without a fight. I started by reviewing the HOA bylaws, searching for any loopholes or ambiguities that I could exploit. I spent hours poring over the fine print, highlighting sections that seemed relevant to my situation. I also reached out to other neighbors, hoping to find more witnesses who were willing to speak out against Karen's behavior. To my surprise, several neighbors expressed their support, telling me that they were tired of Karen's constant meddling and that they were happy to see someone finally standing up to her. Armed with my evidence and the support of my neighbors, I drafted a detailed response to the HOA violation notice. I meticulously refuted each of the accusations, providing photos, measurements, and witness statements to prove that the beast was legally parked and not in violation of any HOA rules. I also included a strongly worded statement condemning Karen's abuse of power and her attempts to harass me and my family. I argued that her actions were motivated by personal animosity and that the HOA should not allow itself to be used as a tool for her petty vendettas. With my response complete, I mailed it to the HOA, along with copies of all my supporting documentation. I knew that it was a long shot, but I had to try. I wasn't going to let Karen win without a fight. The next step was to prepare for the HOA meeting, where I would have the opportunity to present my case in person. I knew that Karen would be there, ready to unleash her full fury upon me. But I was ready for her. I had my evidence, my witnesses, and my unwavering determination to defend my right to park my car in my own driveway. The showdown was coming. And I was ready to rumble. The day of the HOA meeting arrived, and I felt a nervous flutter in my stomach. I knew that this was it, the moment of truth. I had prepared my case, gathered my evidence, and rallied my supporters. Now, all that was left to do was present my arguments and hope that the HOA board would see reason. I arrived at the community center a few minutes early, and I could already feel the tension in the air. The room was packed with residents, many of whom were eager to witness the showdown between me and Karen. I spotted Karen sitting at the front of the room, next to the HOA president. She was dressed in a power suit, her hair perfectly coiffed, and her face set in a stern expression. She looked like she was ready for battle. As I took my seat, I noticed several neighbors giving me encouraging nods. I even saw Mrs. Henderson in the back row, holding a sign that read, "I stand with Alex." It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to me. The meeting began with the usual formalities, but everyone knew what we were really there for. Finally, the HOA president called my name and invited me to present my case. I stood up, took a deep breath, and began to speak. I calmly and methodically laid out the facts, presenting my evidence and refuting each of the accusations in the violation notice. I emphasized that the beast was legally parked on my property and that it was not obstructing any views or creating any nuisances. I also spoke about Karen's history of harassment and her abuse of power within the community. I argued that her actions were motivated by personal animosity and that the HOA should not allow itself to be used as a tool for her petty vendettas. As I spoke, I could see Karen growing increasingly agitated. She kept interrupting me with objections and accusations, but I refused to be rattled. I stood my ground, calmly and respectfully presenting my case. Finally, it was Karen's turn to speak. She launched into a tirade, ranting about the beast, my disrespect for the HOA rules, and my general unsuitability for living in Harmony Glade. She even accused me of being a bad influence on the neighborhood children. Her arguments were weak and unsupported, and it was clear that she was relying more on personal attacks than on facts. As she spoke, I could see the HOA board members exchanging glances, their expressions a mixture of amusement and disapproval. I knew that I had won. After Karen finished her tirade, the HOA president called for a vote. The board members exchanged glances, clearly weighing the evidence and considering the potential fallout from their decision. Finally, the president announced the results of the vote. The board has voted to dismiss the violation notice, he declared, his voice firm. We find that Mr. Alex is in compliance with the HOA rules and regulations, and we see no reason to take any further action. A collective gasp went through the room, followed by a smattering of applause. I couldn't help but smile. I had won. The president continued, furthermore, the board would like to remind all residents that HOA rules are to be applied fairly and consistently. We will not tolerate the use of HOA regulations for personal vendettas or harassment. He then turned to Karen, his expression stern. Ms. Karen, the board is concerned about your recent behavior and your repeated attempts to use the HOA to target your neighbors. We urge you to reconsider your actions and to focus on promoting harmony within the community. Karen's face turned beet red, and she sputtered with indignation. This is outrageous, she exclaimed, her voice trembling with anger. You're all siding with him. You're letting him get away with breaking the rules. Ms. Karen, the president said, his voice firm, the board has made its decision. This matter is closed. Karen glared at me, her eyes filled with hatred. This isn't over, she hissed, her voice barely audible. I'll find a way to make you pay. I simply smiled and shrugged. I knew that Karen would never give up, but I was confident that I could handle whatever she threw my way. I had proven that I wasn't afraid to stand up to her, and I had shown the other residents that they didn't have to be intimidated by her. As I left the community center, I felt a sense of triumph. I had won the battle, but I knew that the war was far from over. Karen was still out there, plotting her revenge. But I was ready for her. I had the beast on my side, and together, we could take on anything, even an HOA Karen with a vendetta. Or so I hoped. Life in Harmony Glade settled into a new normal. Karen, while still present, was noticeably less aggressive. She still gave me the occasional icy glare, but she seemed to have learned that direct confrontation was no longer an effective strategy. However, I remained vigilant. I knew that Karen was still out there, simmering with resentment and plotting her next move. I continued to document any interactions with her and to monitor my property for any signs of HOA violations. I even installed a security camera, discreetly positioned to overlook my driveway and front yard. It was a small price to pay for peace of mind. The beast, meanwhile, continued to be a symbol of my defiance. I made sure to keep it clean and well maintained, but I refused to hide it away or to tone down its rugged appearance. It was my car, and I was proud of it. Over time, I noticed a subtle shift in the attitude of some of my neighbors. Some, who had previously avoided me out of fear of Karen's wrath, began to offer friendly greetings and even engage in casual conversations. It seemed that my stand against Karen had emboldened them to be more open and welcoming. One day, Mrs. Henderson even invited me over for tea. We sat on her porch, sipping lemonade and chatting about the neighborhood gossip. She confided in me that she had always admired my courage and that she was grateful for my willingness to stand up to Karen. It was a small moment, but it made me realize that my battle with Karen had had a positive impact on the community. I had shown my neighbors that it was possible to challenge the status quo and to resist the pressures of conformity. Of course, Karen was still out there, lurking in the shadows. But I was no longer afraid of her. I had faced her head-on and emerged victorious. And I knew that, with the support of my neighbors and the unwavering loyalty of the beast, I could handle anything she threw my way. The HOA queen had been dethroned, at least for now. However, the peace was shattered one Saturday afternoon. I was washing the beast, enjoying the sunshine and the feeling of accomplishment, when I heard a loud crash coming from my backyard. My heart skipped a beat. What was that? I cautiously made my way around the house, my senses on high alert. As I rounded the corner, I gasped in disbelief. My prized rose bushes, which I had carefully cultivated for years, were completely destroyed. The pots were shattered, the flowers were trampled, and the soil was scattered everywhere. It looked like a tornado had ripped through my garden. And standing amidst the wreckage, a smug look on her face, was Karen. "Oh, dear," she said, feigning surprise. "It looks like there's been an accident. I was just admiring your roses, and I tripped. How clumsy of me." I stared at her in disbelief, my anger rising to a boiling point. "You did this on purpose, didn't you?" I accused, my voice trembling. "You destroyed my garden because you're still angry about the HOA meeting." Karen simply shrugged, her eyes gleaming with malice. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "It was just an accident. But perhaps you should consider planting something less conspicuous. Those roses were rather garish, don't you think?" I clenched my fists, struggling to control my temper. I knew that arguing with Karen would be pointless. She would just deny everything and try to provoke me further. Instead, I grabbed my phone and started taking photos of the damage, making sure to capture Karen's presence in the frame. I knew that this was just another attempt to harass me, and I was determined to document it. "I'm calling the police," I said, my voice firm. "You vandalized my property, and I'm going to press charges." Karen's smug expression faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Go ahead," she scoffed. "It's your word against mine. And who do you think the police are going to believe? A respected member of the community like me, or a troublemaker like you?" I ignored her taunts and dialed 911. I knew that it was a long shot, but I had to try. Karen had crossed the line, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. This time, I was determined to make her pay. The police arrived and, after a brief investigation, determined that there wasn't enough evidence to prove that Karen had intentionally damaged my rose bushes. They took a report, but they didn't arrest her. I was disappointed, but not surprised. I knew that it would be difficult to prove Karen's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. But I wasn't giving up. I spent the next few days cleaning up the mess in my backyard and replanting my rose bushes. It was a lot of work, but I found it therapeutic. As I carefully tended to the new plants, I felt a renewed sense of determination. I also started exploring other legal options. I contacted a lawyer and discussed the possibility of filing a civil lawsuit against Karen for harassment and property damage. The lawyer said that it would be a challenging case, but that I had a reasonable chance of success. As I was weighing my options, I received another unexpected surprise. One morning, I found a small package on my doorstep. It was anonymously addressed, with no return address. Curious, I opened the package and found a flash drive inside. I plugged it into my computer and discovered a hidden video file. I clicked on the file and watched in stunned silence as a video played, showing Karen deliberately destroying my rose bushes. The video had been recorded from a hidden camera, presumably placed by one of my neighbors. I couldn't believe my eyes. I finally had concrete proof of Karen's guilt. I immediately contacted the police and shared the video with them. This time, they had no choice but to take action. They arrested Karen and charged her with vandalism and harassment. The news spread quickly through Harmony Glade, and the other residents were overjoyed. They had long been terrorized by Karen's behavior, and they were thrilled to see her finally face justice. As for me, I felt a sense of vindication. I had stood up to Karen, I had refused to be intimidated by her, and I had finally brought her to justice. The HOA queen had been dethroned for good. And Harmony Glade could finally return to being a peaceful and harmonious community. Or so I hoped. There's always more drama, right? With Karen facing criminal charges, the HOA finally took notice. They scheduled a special meeting to discuss her behavior and to consider whether to revoke her membership. I attended the meeting, along with several other neighbors who had been victimized by Karen's actions. We shared our stories, detailing her harassment, her abuse of power, and her general disregard for the well-being of the community. The HOA board members listened intently, their faces growing more somber with each passing testimony. It was clear that they were finally realizing the extent of Karen's misdeeds. After hearing all the evidence, the board voted unanimously to revoke Karen's membership in the HOA. She was no longer allowed to participate in community events, to serve on committees, or to have any say in the governance of Harmony Glade. It was a symbolic victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. Karen had been stripped of her power, and she was no longer able to terrorize the neighborhood with impunity. The legal proceedings against Karen dragged on for several months. She initially pleaded not guilty, but eventually, she agreed to a plea bargain. She pleaded guilty to vandalism and harassment and was sentenced to community service and anger management classes. She was also ordered to pay restitution to me for the damage to my rose bushes. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was enough to cover the cost of replacing the plants. With the legal case resolved and Karen stripped of her power within the HOA, Harmony Glade finally began to heal. The neighbors started to reconnect, and the community spirit began to revive. I continued to live in Harmony Glade for several more years. I never became a model resident, but I did become more involved in the community. I served on the landscaping committee, helping to create a more diverse and welcoming environment. I even organized a neighborhood block party, which was a huge success. The beast, of course, remained a fixture in my driveway. It was a constant reminder of my battle with Karen and a symbol of my commitment to individuality and nonconformity. Eventually, I decided to move on from Harmony Glade. I had achieved what I set out to do, I had stood up to Karen, I had defended my rights, and I had helped to create a more positive and inclusive community. I sold my house and moved to a more rural area, where I could finally enjoy the freedom and adventure that the beast was meant to provide. I bought a small piece of land, built a cabin, and spent my days hiking, camping, and exploring the great outdoors. I never forgot my time in Harmony Glade, or my battle with Karen. It was a valuable lesson in the importance of standing up for what you believe in, even when it's difficult. And every time I looked at the beast, I was reminded that even in the most restrictive and conformist environments, it's possible to find your own path and to live life on your own terms. So, if you ever find yourself facing an HOA Karen, remember my story. Don't be afraid to stand up for your rights. Don't let anyone bully you into submission. And always remember that you have the power to make a difference, even in the most unlikely of places. And maybe, just maybe, you'll inspire others to do the same. The end. Or is it? There's always another Karen, somewhere. Be ready. With my response mailed to the HOA, all that was left to do was wait for the meeting. The days leading up to it were tense. I kept expecting another ridiculous violation notice or some other form of petty harassment, but everything was strangely quiet. Almost too quiet. I spent the time reviewing the HOA bylaws again, making sure I was prepared for any possible arguments Karen might throw my way. I also practiced my presentation, trying to anticipate her objections and crafting clear, concise responses. Finally, the day of the HOA meeting arrived. I dressed in a professional manner, wanting to project an image of competence and respect. I loaded all my evidence into a folder, photos, measurements, witness statements, and a copy of my detailed response. As I walked into the community center, I could feel the tension in the air. Several neighbors gave me sympathetic glances, while others avoided eye contact altogether. I spotted Karen sitting near the front, a smug look on her face. She seemed confident that she was going to win this battle. The meeting began with the usual formalities, but everyone knew that the main event was my appeal. When my name was finally called, I stood up, took a deep breath, and walked to the podium. I started by calmly explaining the situation, emphasizing that I had parked the beast entirely on my property and that it wasn't obstructing any views or creating any safety hazards. I presented my photos and measurements, showing that the Jeep was well within the allowed dimensions for parking in a driveway. Then, I introduced Mrs. Henderson, who testified that she had witnessed the entire incident and that Karen had been acting unreasonably. Other neighbors nodded in agreement, lending their silent support to my case. When I finished, it was Karen's turn to speak. She stood up, her face flushed with anger, and launched into a tirade about how the beast was an eyesore, how it was lowering property values, and how I was a menace to the community. But her arguments were weak and unsupported. She had no evidence to back up her claims, and she relied mostly on personal attacks and emotional appeals. The HOA board members listened patiently, but it was clear that they weren't buying what she was selling. I could see Karen's face getting redder and redder as she went on. She started sputtering and stammering, and it was clear that she was losing her composure. In the end, her attempt to argue her case was a complete failure. She had no facts, no evidence, and no support. And as I sat down, I knew that I had one. The only question was, how would the HOA board vote? The HOA board members conferred briefly, their faces serious. Then, the president cleared his throat and announced their decision. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, he said, the board has voted to dismiss the violation notice against Mr. Alex. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Therefore, he said, the board has voted to issue a formal reprimand to Ms. Karen for her actions. A gasp went through the room. This was even better than I had hoped for. Not only had I won, but Karen had been publicly shamed. The president then addressed Karen directly. "Ms. Karen," he said, "we urge you to reflect on your behavior and to refrain from any further harassment of your neighbors. The HOA is committed to fostering a harmonious community, and we will not tolerate any actions that undermine that goal." Karen, mortified, simply stormed out of the community center, slamming the door behind her. The meeting adjourned shortly afterward, and I was immediately surrounded by well-wishers. Neighbors congratulated me on my victory, thanking me for standing up to Karen and for defending their rights as well. Mrs. Henderson gave me a hug, her eyes shining with pride. "You showed her, Alex," she said. "You really showed her. We're all so grateful." Even some of the neighbors who had previously avoided me now offered their congratulations. It seemed that my stand against Karen had earned me a newfound respect within the community. In the days and weeks that followed, life in Harmony Glade became noticeably more peaceful. Karen, while still present, was much less active in the HOA. She continued to give me dirty looks whenever she saw me, but her attempts to harass me decreased significantly. I suspected that she was still plotting her revenge, but she seemed to have learned that direct confrontation was no longer an effective strategy. She was forced to resort to more subtle and indirect tactics, which were much easier to ignore. I continued to park the beast in my driveway, defiantly displaying my individuality in the face of suburban conformity. I even added a few personal touches to my landscaping, planting some colorful flowers that were definitely not on the HOA's approved list. And as I looked around at my neighborhood, I could see that other residents were starting to push back against the HOA's strict rules as well. People started adding personal touches to their homes, planting flowers of their own, and even leaving their trash cans out in plain sight. It was a small rebellion, but it was a rebellion nonetheless. And it was all thanks to Karen and her 4 a.m. parking dispute. Sometimes, it takes a little bit of chaos to shake things up and to remind people that they have the power to make a difference. Even in the most unlikely of places. The incident with the rogue sprinkler, though humorous, also highlighted something important: the need for community. Before, everyone was so focused on following the rules and avoiding conflict that they forgot how to connect with each other. But after that, things changed. People started talking to each other more, helping each other out, and even organizing neighborhood events. It was like the whole neighborhood had finally woken up and realized that there was more to life than just perfectly manicured lawns and matching mailboxes. We had learned that it was okay to be a little bit different, to challenge the status quo, and to stand up for what we believed in. And it all started with a 4 a.m. parking dispute and a Jeep named the Beast. Looking back on it all, I realized that my battle with Karen was more than just a personal vendetta. It was a symbol of something bigger, the struggle between individuality and conformity, between freedom and control. And while I eventually moved on from Harmony Glade, I know that the lessons I learned there will stay with me forever. I learned the importance of standing up for what you believe in, even when it's difficult. I learned the value of community and the power of connection. And I learned that even in the most restrictive environments, it's possible to find your own path and to live life on your own terms. So, if you ever find yourself facing an HOA Karen, remember my story. Don't be afraid to challenge the rules, to stand up for your rights, and to fight for what you believe in. And always remember that you're not alone. There are other people out there who feel the same way you do. And together, you can make a difference. And maybe, just maybe, you'll inspire others to do the same. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go take the beast out for a spin. There are some mountains calling my name. The end. Really. This time. I think. But keep an eye out for those Karens. They are sneaky. So, what are the takeaways from this whole crazy saga? Well, first and foremost, know your rights. Read your HOA bylaws carefully, and understand what you can and cannot do. Don't be afraid to challenge rules that seem unfair or unreasonable. Second, document everything. Keep a record of all interactions with difficult neighbors, and take photos or videos whenever possible. This will be invaluable if you need to take legal action. Third, find your allies. Talk to your neighbors and see if they've had similar experiences. There's strength in numbers, and you're more likely to succeed if you have the support of your community. Fourth, don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. It can be scary to confront a difficult neighbor, but it's important to assert your boundaries and to defend your rights. Fifth, know when to walk away. Sometimes, the best course of action is to simply disengage and to focus on your own well-being. It's not always worth it to fight every battle, and sometimes, the best victory is to simply move on. And finally, remember that life is too short to be stressed out by petty HOA disputes. Focus on what's truly important: your family, your friends, and your own happiness. Oh, and one more thing, always keep an eye out for those rogue sprinklers. You never know when they might strike. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find a little bit of laughter in the midst of all the chaos. Because sometimes, that's all you can do. Now, seriously, the end. For real. No more Karens. No more HOAs. Just me, the beast, and the open road. Wish me luck. And remember, stay vigilant. Those Karens are always lurking, somewhere. Okay, so after the big rose bush incident, and before I left Harmony Glade forever, there was one more smaller, sillier thing that happened. It didn't involve Karen directly, but it felt like a little echo of all the HOA madness. It was summer, and the HOA had these automatic sprinkler systems set up to keep all the lawns perfectly green. Except, one of the sprinklers went rogue. I mean, totally rogue. It started spinning like crazy, shooting water everywhere, not just on the lawns, but all over the sidewalk, up the side of Mrs. Henderson's house, and even onto a parked car. It was like a scene from a slapstick comedy. People started calling the HOA, complaining about the out-of-control sprinkler. But, of course, it was a Saturday, and nobody from the HOA was answering the phone. So, a few of us neighbors decided to take matters into our own hands. We tried everything to stop the sprinkler. We tried turning it off at the source, but we couldn't find the valve. We tried blocking it with cardboard, but the water pressure was too strong. We even tried using a rake to knock it over, but it just kept spinning. Finally, little Timmy Henderson, Mrs. Henderson's grandson, came up with the brilliant idea to use a big beach umbrella to block the water. It actually worked. We managed to contain the sprinkler's fountain. It was so ridiculously absurd. The water was still going everywhere, but at least it wasn't hitting the houses anymore. We all stood there, soaked to the bone, laughing hysterically at the absurdity of the situation. Eventually, someone from the HOA finally showed up and managed to shut off the water. But for a brief moment, we had all united in the face of suburban sprinkler madness. It was a reminder that even in the most regulated environments, there's always room for a little bit of chaos. And sometimes, that chaos can bring people together. Even if it's just to laugh at a rogue sprinkler.